And the facts completely rebut the notion that whites are victimized by a cultural genocide.
What you're about to see are clips from last Thursday's Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing, where Trump nominee Jeremy Carl was pressed about past remarks regarding white culture being erased in America. The senators questioning him are Chris Murphy out of Connecticut and Tim Kaine out of Virginia. Here we go.
Define white identity and what you think is being erased about white identity.
Certain types of Anglo-derived culture that comes from our history.
There's what?
Let me think about this.
In these clips, you can see Trump nominee Jeremy Carl struggling to answer very simple questions as he resorts to stalling, redirections, and retreating from his own earlier points.
Obviously, you can have sub-elements of that culture. You could have Italians, you could have Irish, and those are in many ways more
But
distinct.
you're worried about white culture. You're not worried about, you're now retreating to ethnic identity. You don't speak about ethnic identity. You speak about white identity. So tell me the values that stitch together white identity and that make it different than black identity.
I would say that the white church is very different than the black church in terms of its tone and style on average. Foodways could often be different.
So our ability to access white churches or white food or white music is being erased. Answer this question, right? Because underlying your beliefs is a sentiment that white culture is just simply better.
The nominee clearly is struggling with these questions because they aren't founded on facts such as peer-reviewed research, but rather white nationalist ideologies and racist right-wing conspiracy theories.
Whites are pretty well represented in the United States Senate.
They are well represented in this body, yes.
And how about in the House of Representatives?
Senator Kaine, I don't have those particular numbers,
But
however.
you would agree that they're pretty well represented in the House of Representatives.
Senator, I would, again, thank you for the question.
How about in the ranks of American presidents throughout history, including now, pretty well represened whites?
Senator.
And how about in the ranks of vice presidents during American history now? Whites pretty well represented in that group, right?
Senator, thank you again for the question.
Yeah. I don't think it's hard. How about on the United States Supreme Court? Throughout our history, and including now, whites pretty well represented on the United States Supreme Court, correct?
I think obviously historically, I would of course agree with you. Of course, the vast majority of Americans were white at that time. It's now a much more diverse society.
Let's focus on right now. How about in the ranks of American governors? You think whites are pretty well represented?
I would just have to look at the numbers. I don't know.
How about this in the ranks of CEOs of major corporations today? You think whites are pretty well represented?
Senator, thank you for the question. I suspect that they are probably pretty well represented in the
high-income people, and we can define it however you want. Let's just say like top 10% of wealthy Americans. You think whites are pretty well represented?
The problem here is when you're accustomed to privilege and favor, equality begins to feel like oppression. When faced with direct and sharp questions in a controlled environment, these ideologies fall flat on their face. Because the truth is, they're not based on facts, but rather fallacies and biased point of views.
A cultural genocide, that's a stiff claim. And it's an interesting one because it's kind of a white victimhood argument. But if I remember my colleague, Senator Rosen, she was reading comments to you where you had been saying, man, Jews play the victim. Jews like to be the victim. And yet you're making a claim that whites are victimized by a cultural genocide when all the statistics would say, not just in history, but today, that whites are very well represented at every level of every institution. They're very.
In conclusion, the facts of the matter are there is no erasure of white culture.